back with another McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse action figure review. And of late, I've been really pleased with the direction that the DC Multiverse line has been going in, because they've really started to diversify that line quite significantly, and we're starting to see some characters and costumes from past eras in the comic books, and in particular some of those more classic or iconic looks for some of these characters. So I'm really pleased to be looking at the Knightfall Catwoman figure. Now, believe it or not, this costume here, this purple outfit, was the one that she wore during the 90s, which is the era that I grew up reading Batman comics. And for a number of years, this was also the costume she wore in her monthly ongoing series as well. So I think for a lot of people, this will be a quite iconic look for this character, one that they grew up reading and really strongly associate with this character. So I'm really pleased to finally see it in the 7-inch action figure scale, because I actually haven't seen this costume in an action figure in a very, very long time. So let's take a look at the packaging. Well, there's no real surprises here. If you've ever owned or seen any of the other figures in this line, it is the exact same packaging we've seen before. It is mostly window display. Behind the figure itself, we have that sort of blue montage in the interior inlay, which works quite nicely to really promote the figure inside. Particularly a colourful one like this, it really jumps out of that packaging, which is great. The rest of it, of course, is just basically black borders and the DC Multiverse logo. When we flip the panel, I always call this a giant waste of space, because this is quite a chunky side panel. I just feel it would have been really much better used if we had a nice comic book image here. That would have been much more appropriate and look more colourful on this shelf. As it is, this just feels a little bit bland, but hey, at least it's consistent. When we flip it over onto the back of the packaging, no, we can see this fantastic image. This is comic book artwork. It's a real, obviously, tight close-up of a headshot of Catwoman in this costume, but hey, this is still really great artwork. It's definitely the right costume for the figure that we see in the box, and it looks really, really good. So you can put this on display. There's very little text here to compromise this image, and it does look really good. Now, as pleased as I am to have this figure in my collection, there's definitely something a little bit strange about the way this figure looks. There's no two ways about it. It's a little bit clunky, and we'll go into some of those reasons why in a minute. But let's start off by looking at the head sculpt. I don't think there's anything wrong with this head sculpt. I think it's pretty sharp all in all. Obviously, there is some creative license here when it comes to how the face should look. I think this is a pretty good representation of what I think of as Catwoman. I do like the overall sculpt that they've got here. The paint apps are really quite nice. There's some different colours running through the cheeks there, give it a bit more of a flourish, which is quite nice. The lipstick they've used, for example, and of course the work on the eyes. I think this all looks pretty good. It would have been nice to have been some extra shading on the head there and on the rest of the body, which we'll look at in a moment. But all in all, this looks like a pretty good sculpt. I do like the hair, and I like that there's a number of different colours going through the hair. So it's not just a matte black, there's actually a lot of blue, as you can see, like that wash running through it there to give it a bit more texture and make it look a little bit more lifelike. However, I would probably say the used a little bit too much blue. Maybe they should have had more black running through this, because the hair does look blue now rather than black. So it's a minor criticism, and I think they meant well, but it just feels like they went ever slightly too far with the blue on this one. And then we come to the main body sculpt, and I've got to be honest, this isn't really working for me too much. It just looks a little bit clunky and a bit ungainly. The proportions look ever so slightly out, and it just doesn't look very smooth and not very elegant, which of course Catwoman should be always. So here we've got the problem, obviously, where the articulation meets the design of the action figure, and it's not really working. Of course, this is meant to be body stocking, you know, one suit, and it's meant to be seamless. Of course, we have all these joints which just really show up here. Now, you know I love my articulation. I have no problem with that in principle. I can certainly overlook a lot of this, but I think it's where they've tried to overcompensate, where it just looks a little bit wrong. So the most glaring error here, of course, is the rubber pants that they've given her in the crotch. Obviously, this is a separate piece that goes over the figure. This works really well on most of the McFarlane Toys 7-inch scale. It covers those joints very nicely, and it's usually unnoticeable. But here, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's really thick and ungainly, and it looks a little bit like she's wearing a nappy. If you'll pardon this gratuitous shot that I've taken here, but you can see on the flip side, it just doesn't look very good, does it? It looks yeah, pretty strange. So I definitely have some issues with this. I don't think this works particularly well. The other thing I noticed is that the arms seem a little bit too long. Maybe that's just between the contrast of the black gloves versus the purple of the rest of the top of the arm there, the shoulder. But the arms just look really really long and almost disproportionately so, and I'm not quite sure if that's right. So something about that just looks a little bit off to me personally. And then my final criticism would be that I wish there'd been a little bit of paint apps running through this costume here. It's just a matte purple, and it would have been really nice to have just had a little bit of shading here and there to capitalise on what is otherwise a good sculpt. I do think the overall sculpt they've got is good. I just don't think it comes together particularly well with all the various bits and pieces here. Looking at the gloves a little bit closer, I do really like what they've done with the arms here. I love that they've used this glossy paint. It definitely gives the figure an extra texture, which is nice. And also, they reflect the light very nicely. It definitely gives it that look, I suppose, of PVC or something like that, that sort of leather that she might have on. So I think that works really quite well, and it's pretty effective. They've also given her two hands here, which are sort of gripping hands, which is going to be pretty useful for holding that whip that she comes with. Likewise, if we look at the legs, again, they've used the same glossy paint on these boots. I think this looks really good for all the same reasons, and I think this is pretty effective. So, looking at the articulation, she does have a ball joint in the head, but as you can see, there's definite resistance there coming from that hairpiece, which is, although is a soft rubber, is definitely causing some hindrance there. She can move her head sort of side to side, and she can kind of just about lift it up and down, but very restricted motion here. She does have ball joints in the shoulders, and you'll notice there's also a complementary butterfly wing joint here at the upper shoulder as well, which again compromises the look a little bit, but it works pretty well. She does have double joints at the elbow, so she can lift her hand all the way back to the top of her head, which is great. And there is a ball joint at the wrist there that allows their lower hand to rotate all the way around, and of course it will also hinge forwards and backwards. It can look a little clunky, but at least there's a huge range of motion here. Now, she does have a ball joint in the upper torso, so she can move from side to side, she can lean left and right a little bit, and she can also bend forwards and backwards. There's also another ball joint at the waist, so once again, she can move from side to side, lean left and right, and of course, bend forwards and backwards. But again, it's one of those things where this articulation is clearly compromising the overall look and aesthetic of the figure, and the use of two ball joints here is probably a little bit excessive and not really necessary. She's got more ball joints in the hips, so of course the legs will kick out to the side, the legs will also kick forwards and backwards, and there's another double joint at the knee, so that lower leg can kick all the way back to her back, which is fantastic. At the ankle, she has another ball joint, so that foot can move from side to side, and of course it will also hinge forwards and backwards. So plenty of range of motion here, and this works pretty well, but she also has some toe articulation there as well. DC Multiverse figures tend to be pretty light on accessories. They always seem to come with the same round display stand and usually a trading card. But Catwoman is lucky because she does actually come with an additional pair of hands. These are two open hands, and I really like the sculpt on these. It really caught that sort of cat-like sort of nails. I think that works really well. And then she also has her whip, which is actually a pretty good size. My only criticism of the whip is that it feels maybe a little bit too big. It's quite a chunky handle that she has on this, and it's almost too much for her grip. I had to really force it in there. She doesn't really hold it very naturally. As you can see, this just feels like it's bulging out of her grip, and I feel like this should have been scaled down a little bit. But that said, the extra length is pretty cool, and if you're willing to persevere, you can create some pretty interesting and dynamic poses using this accessory. A quick size comparison for those who are interested, here's how she scales against the DC Multiverse Batman from the Batman vs Hush Deluxe 2-pack. As you can see, these scale quite nicely against each other. She is a little bit shorter than Batman, as she should be even in her heels, so this looks pretty accurate. I really like this sizing and the scaling. I think this works really well. So then, final thoughts from me. I'm gonna give this figure 3 stars. It's not a bad figure by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not great either. I had a lot of expectation for this figure. I really like this costume, as I said at the beginning of the video, but it just feels a little bit poorly executed, really. Good idea, very appreciate them making the effort to do this, but it just doesn't quite come together. I do really like the extra hands. I think that looks fantastic. I love that open palm hand. I think it looks really cool. I think the whip works quite well for the most part. It does feel a little bit oversized for this figure. It's certainly difficult to get into her grip, which is disappointing. And I think if they'd actually opted to put a wire inside it, that would have given you a lot more creative freedom to create a lot more dynamic poses, which would have been fantastic. I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't get more shading on the figure. And as I said, for me, the killer with all of this is those rubber pants in the crotch area. It just really throws off the whole look and finesse of the figure, and it just looks a little bit clunky and a bit silly. But otherwise,
Otherwise, the articulation is good, the sculpt is good, and what paint apps we do have, particularly in the boots and in the gloves there, works really well. And I think they've really tried hard to do something quite interesting here. It just doesn't quite work as well as intended. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.